Hello, you gorgeous people out there, and welcome back to another video on the TheRocketHub. My name is Philip, and today I'm going to bring you the third episode of Spaceflight DeepDives. Welcome to Spaceflight DeepDives, my original series, in which I will pick an interesting topic out of the world of spaceflight and tell you everything you have to know about it. Videos out of this series are way more complex and longer than the normal episodes on this channel and therefore will be released once per month. This is Spaceflight DeepDives. The topic of the third episode of Spaceflight DeepDives will be the world of SmallSat Launchers. And because there are a lot of topics to cover in this video, I have divided the video into chapters with specific timestamps, which you can see on screen right now. If you should decide to just watch one chapter or rewatch one, you can always just jump straight forward to a section that interests you most. With that said, let's start with the introduction. Have you ever heard of Rocket Lab, Relativity Space, Astra, or Firefly Aerospace before? Probably you did, because those names are mentioned pretty often in the last years when people are talking about the future of spaceflight. All of those four names are private aerospace companies providing launch services to customers already or plan to do so in a few years. And all of them are developing or have developed their own launch vehicles with completely different design approaches. But despite being four different rockets, they all are competing against each other. All four vehicles are designed by the four companies, are so-called SmallSat Launchers, and therefore aim towards the same group of customers. And due to being SmallSat Launchers, they have something else in common. They are absolutely tiny when compared to other rockets like the Falcon 9. You could stack about 4 SmallSat Launchers on top of each other and the tower will still be the same size as the Falcon 9. Or with other words, they are not as big as you would imagine an orbital rocket to be. But the SmallSat business has been booming over the last years and has become more lucrative than ever before. Dedicated SmallSat launchers are one of the new faces of private spaceflight, but are they really that effective, or should we continue going to space without them? Is smaller really better? Most satellites launched over the course of the 20th century were fairly large. They weighed around a couple tons and had the size of a family car, and therefore required very large launch vehicles to ride on. But in the late 1990s, a new type of satellite had its debut, the so-called CubeSat. A CubeSat is normed to a size of 11.35 to 34.05 by 10 by 10 centimeters, meaning a CubeSat is really small compared to every other satellite of this time. And all the other satellites started to become smaller due to increasing material and launch costs as well. Many of them became so small that they now fitted onto the newly created category of the so-called SmallSat, satellites with a weight of less than 500 kilograms. With loads of new and small satellite models coming into existence, it became more than clear that all of the rockets online by that time were able to fit the requirements of the growing SmallSat market. It is just too expensive to launch a satellite the size of a small box on a giant rocket built to transport tons of payload into orbit. Bigger rockets just don't make sense when launching tiny payloads, except when you're trying to launch a lot of them. But in this case, customers often had to wait for a long time because the rocket wouldn't launch if it wasn't filled to the brim with SmallSat. The market had a serious problem. But the answer might seem logically. Build a smaller rocket specialized on launching CubeSats and SmallSats to orbit with payload capacities rarely higher than a few hundred kilograms. Such a rocket can't lift more than a few SmallSats, but due to being so small, it costs much less for the customer to launch with that rocket instead of a giant, tons of payloads lifting beast. Smaller rockets were just suited better for that specific task, and tada, the SmallSat launcher was born. A rocket typically between 10 to 25 meters high and weighing just a few tons, capable of lifting up to 2 tons to low Earth orbit and barely a few hundred kilograms beyond. Or short, every rocket that can't lift more than 2 tons is considered to be a SmallSat launcher. The history of SmallSat launchers goes far back to the beginning of spaceflight. And when I say beginning, I mean the very beginning of spaceflight itself. In fact, the first rockets capable of achieving orbit ever, the Russian Sputnik vehicle derived from the R-7 Semyorka ICBM and the American Vanguard and Juno rockets, were by standard definition SmallSat launchers. But in the late 1950s to early 1960s, in the booming phase of the first space race, the rockets were growing rapidly. They simply grew out of the SmallSat launcher size. Over the course of the following 4 decades, dozens of SmallSat launch vehicles entered service and retired really quickly after that. But many of them flew only a few missions each. The market for SmallSat launchers just wasn't there. Nearly all satellites of that time were enormous and often didn't even fit inside the payload bay of the space shuttle, meaning the SmallSat launchers weren't required most of the time. The only exception here was the NASA-developed Scout rocket, which has launched 125 missions between 1961 and 1994. But despite that number being very high and impressive, you have to consider that those 125 launches were conducted over a period of over 30 years, equaling less than 4 launches per year. But shortly after the beginning of the 21st century, the SmallSat market started to grow rapidly. The satellite market began to be commercialized, and therefore satellites were now smaller to fit into smaller vehicles, resulting in lower cost for the customers and satellite manufacturers. Many larger rockets started to lift off on so-called rideshare missions, flying with many satellites on board at once to make the flight more cost-effective. And because there was a lack of cheap launch vehicles produced by the national space agencies and their partners, first commercial and private rocket manufacturers were founded and started to develop their own launchers. And among them was one of the big players we all know, SpaceX. They started out the development of their Falcon 1 launch vehicle, a typical SmallSat launcher and maybe the father of all modern SmallSat launchers. But SpaceX only flew a single operational mission on the Falcon 9 before moving on to develop the Falcon 9, a much bigger and reusable rocket, we all know that. But SpaceX wasn't the only private company founded around this time. Many others like Rocket Lab, Relativity Space, Vector Launch, and Firefly Space Systems, which should later become Firefly Aerospace, started to develop their own SmallSat launchers as well to enter a steadily growing market. By the early 2020s, where we are now, all of them will have an operational launch vehicle in their possession. As of May 2021, there aren't too many SmallSat launchers in operation, but there are quite a few vehicles in development or testing, and all of them will enter service in the next years. To get a better understanding of what SmallSat launchers are and what they're capable of, we are going to take a look at some of them. The vehicles to be compared are either active from the past or going online very soon. Among them are the only 2 dedicated SmallSat launchers in operation, the Rocket Lab Electron and the air-launched Launcher 1 of Virgin Orbit, the first privately built orbital rocket ever, SpaceX's Falcon 9, and 2 vehicles from the future, including the Firefly Alpha and the Astra Rocket 3. What we'll do is compare those 5 vehicles in their main stats like height, payload, rocket fuels, price, and so on. We need to know those values to truly get an understanding of how SmallSat launchers compete with the larger sisters and if they have advantages over them. First of all, let's look at the size of the different launch vehicles, meaning their height and diameter. The Falcon 1 by SpaceX starts out with a total height of 21 meters and a diameter of 1.7 meters, making it one of the larger SmallSat launchers. Then there are our operational vehicles, the Rocket Lab Electron with its 17 meters height and 1.2 meter diameter, and the Air-Launched Launcher 1 with a total height of 21.3 meters and a diameter of 1.8 meters, making it slightly larger than the Falcon 1. And we of course have our soon-to-be operational vehicles, with the Firefly Alpha getting to a height of 29 meters and a diameter of 1.8 meters, making it by far the largest vehicle on our list. The other future launcher is the Astra Rocket 3 with a height of just 11.6 meters and a diameter of around 1.5 meters, making it seem tiny even when compared to other SmallSat launchers. The second step is looking at the payload capacities the different launchers are capable of lifting to low Earth orbit. And despite being designed to lift just a few hundred kilograms, the payload capacity of SmallSat launchers is important for the amount of satellites the vehicle can lift and therefore the price the customer has to pay. The Falcon 1 was able to lift a total of 670 kilograms, but never flew payloads heavier than 180, despite being capable of lifting more. Rocket Lab's Electron rocket achieves a total of 300 kg of payload to LEO, which is not even half the Falcon 1. The Launcher 1 offers a payload capacity of 500 kg, but it has got some advantages here because of being launched from a plane and therefore not needing as much fuel as the other vehicles. Firefly's Alpha rocket will be able to get up to 1 ton of payload into orbit, making it the absolute king in this category, with quite a bit of distance to place 2. The last vehicle, the Rocket 3 by Astra, has the smallest payload capacity with just 150 kilograms. The payload capacities of all vehicles are very close together, with only Astra Rocket 3 and the Firefly Alpha showing some more remarkable differences. But since they are all SmallSat launchers, their payload capacities are all around half a ton, meaning the 4 vehicles that will be online soon will compete with each other directly. When it comes to the choice of fuel, all of our 5 launch providers have chosen RP1, a highly refined kerosene and liquid oxygen, to power their vehicles. The engines of the 5 vehicles are fairly similar, except for the Electron, which has the only electric pump-fed engine ever developed, making this vehicle somewhat unique here. And now we get to the really interesting stuff. The amount of money a customer has to pay for launch of these different SmallSat launchers. We will go over that fairly quick now, but it will be important for chapter 5 of the video. Starting out with the Falcon 1, we have to pay a price of $7 million to get one going, making it the cheapest rocket of its time. The carbon fiber Electron vehicle has a fairly high cost, landing at approximately $7.5 million, meaning it costs more than a Falcon 1 despite having not even half the payload capability. The Launcher 1 comes in even more expensive at $12 million, meaning it costs a lot more than the Falcon 1 and the Electron. The cost-saving effect of launching from mid-air doesn't seem to have that big of an impact on the overall cost here. The largest vehicle, the Firefly Alpha, has not just the highest payload capacity, but also the highest cost at $15 million per flight of the rocket. The last and smallest vehicle, the Rocket 3 by Astra, has also the smallest price with just $2.5 million, making it the king in this category by quite far. But the cost alone doesn't fully state whether a rocket is expensive or not, because every vehicle can lift a different amount of cargo into orbit. The best solution for that problem is to look at the cost-to-payload ratio of all 5 SmallSat launchers, measured in dollars you have to pay per kilogram of payload you want to fly. A quick reminder here, a small number means a better value in this category. The Falcon 1 has by far the best value in this category, with a whopping $10,448 per kilogram with maximum payload on board. Rocket Lab's Electron costs a lot more, 2.5 times more to be precise, with around $25,000 per kilogram. Despite costing a lot more than the Electron, the Launcher 1 achieves a ratio of $24,000 per kilogram because it can lift a lot more than the Electron. The Firefly Alpha has the advantage of being able to lift an entire ton of payload for relatively low cost, giving it a ratio of $15,000 per kilogram. The last vehicle is the Rocket 3 by Astra, which has the cheapest cost per flight and a ratio of around $16,667 per kilogram. And something else that could be nice to know is the number of flights the different vehicles have already conducted. The Falcon 1 retired after only 5 flights, with just 2 of them being successful. The Electron is currently operational and has conducted 20 launches, but has suffered its third failure just a few days ago. The Launcher 1 has flown twice, but has many more missions under contract. The Firefly Alpha isn't operational yet, and therefore has 0 flights. Despite being not operational, Astra's Rocket 3 has already flown 3 times, but failed to reach orbit on all 3 attempts. Although the 5 different SmallSat launchers seem to be fairly similar, the differences between them are bigger than most of us would think. But what about SmallSat launchers versus bigger rockets? Now that we know how the different SmallSat launchers compare between each other, we have a rough feeling of their size, their payload and cost and so on. We know what they do and how they work, but the main question remains, is smaller really better? To answer that, we are going to do another comparison, but this time we'll include just 3 of the SmallSat launchers we got to know earlier. The Rocket Lab Electron, since it is the most commonly launched SmallSat vehicle here, the Firefly Alpha with the biggest payload capacity, and the Falcon 1 with the lowest cost to payload ratio. You will see why I've chosen those 3 vehicles. But this time we are not going to compare them with each other, but instead we will compare them to bigger rockets and see if the smaller ones can outperform them. For the larger vehicles, we are looking at the most commonly used vehicle of today, SpaceX's Falcon 9, and the most used vehicle of the future, the fully and rapidly reusable Starship. We are now going to compare the 3 SmallSat launchers to their big friends and in the same 5 categories as we compared them to each other. The stats of the SmallSat launchers have of course not changed since the last comparison, but I will write them down again for better comparison. In terms of size, the Falcon 1 is 21 by 1.7 meters, the Rocket Lab Electron 17 by 1.2 meters, and the Firefly Alpha 29 by 1.8 meters large. Or should I say meters small, because they are so tiny when compared to other rockets? Jokes beside, let's get to know our 2 new vehicles of interest a bit better. The size of the Falcon 9 is 70 meters in height and 3.7 meters in diameter, meaning it is approximately 3 times as big as the Falcon 1 in every direction. All 3 of our SmallSat launchers combined still wouldn't be the same size in the Falcon 9. And the Falcon 9 is in a category of medium launch vehicles. But then there is the next generation super heavy lift launcher called Starship, with a total height of around 120 meters and a diameter of 9 meters, towering even above the Falcon 9. Compared to a Starship, a SmallSat launcher is truly a gnome. And that picture appears again when we're looking at the maximum payload capacities of our launch vehicles. Again, the stats of the smaller ones stay the same. The Falcon 1 lifts a maximum of 670 kilograms, the Electron 300, and the Firefly Alpha 1000. SpaceX's current workhorse, the Falcon 9, is able to lift a total of 22.5 tons to low Earth orbit. But that is only for the expandable configuration of the Falcon 9, which has only flown once, and that was the Crew Dragon in-flight abort test, and that specific booster got blown up during the flight, so that doesn't count. For our comparison, we are only going to look at the reusable configuration of the Falcon 9, which is able to get a total of 15.6 tons into space. That number is lower because it has to carry around some additional fuel for the landing. Starship, the indirect successor of the Falcon 9, is said to have a maximum payload capacity of at least 100 tons, but that number may go up to around 150 tons in the future when the system is better developed. That is almost 10 times the payload capacity of the Falcon 9 and enough to lift the three SmallSat launchers together when fully fueled and with the maximum payload capacity on board. In the moment I noticed that fact, I began to truly realize how freaking huge Starship is going to be. For the choice of fuel, we again have four vehicles powered on RP1 and liquid oxygen, since the three SmallSat launchers hadn't got an engine swap since the first comparison, and the Falcon 9 runs on the same engine as the Falcon 1, just 9 of them as the name tells us. Only Starship differs a lot from all the vehicles, again by running on a combination of methane and liquid oxygen called Methalox. SpaceX hopes to get multiple advantages out of the new fuel source, including better reusable and on-orbit refueling. But now we get to compare the really important stuff we need to answer our main question. Are SmallSat launchers better than bigger rockets? To get to any form of conclusion, we have to take a look at the cost of our vehicles and compare it. The Falcon 1 is the cheapest of the three SmallSat launchers with $7 billion per launch, closely followed by the Electron costing just $500,000 more at $7.5 million per flight. The Firefly Alpha is much more capable than both the Falcon 9 and the Electron and therefore costs $15 million. Of course, that hasn't changed. And now we get to the bigger rockets. For both of them, this price tag is really hard to determine since it is not public or not even released yet. The Falcon 9 is listed for $62 million when expanded and $50 million when reused, but internal sources state that the price for reused Falcon 9 is actually around $36 million. Because we took the best case prices for all the SmallSat launchers as well, we are going to assume the $36 million are correct. For Starship, we have the problem of it not having entered service yet, so meaning there are only goals and estimates of what it could cost in the future. SpaceX is targeting a launch cost of less than $2 million per launch, but that goal is really ambitious and hard to hit. Many experts are estimating a price of around $8 million, but because that is more than 4 times the price of SpaceX's estimate, I will assume a price of $5 million right in the middle between the two estimates. That could be the most realistic one. And now we have to talk about the cost to payload ratio. The stats of the SmallSat launcher still stay the same, with the Falcon 1 having a value of $10,448 per kilogram, the Electron having a much higher value at $25,000 per kilogram, and the Firefly Alpha being in between with $15,000 per kilogram. But really interesting it gets when looking at the other two vehicles. The most flown rocket of our time, the Falcon 9, gets an astonishing value of around $2,307 per kilogram, making it the most cost-effective vehicle currently available. But Starship is going to take the next step of rocket evolution and hopes to achieve an unbelievable value of just $50 per kilogram. That value will be achieved by full and rapid reusability of the Starship system. And for the number of flights, we have the Falcon 1 at 5, the Electron at 20, and the Firefly Alpha at 0. Due to being SpaceX's current workhorse, the Falcon 9 has already flown 118 times, but that number is going up almost weekly and will likely be already outdated when you watch this video. And Starship has 0 flights, since we are talking about the full system made out of Starship itself and the Super Heavy, so the exploded prototypes of Starbase Texas don't count. Sorry. With that second comparison, we are getting closer to finally answer our main question. But just the stats don't do the entire thing. We have to truly understand their meaning and apply them to reality. To answer whether smaller is better in the spaceflight industry, we have to find the advantages of both dedicated SmallSat launchers and bigger launch vehicles like the Falcon 9 and Starship in regards to the SmallSat launch market. At first, we are going to focus on the advantages of SmallSat launchers. The main reason why they were invented at all is to have an option for customers to get if they're not wanting to wait ages for until a bigger vehicle is booked out. Having an own rocket brings many advantages. You don't have to wait as long for your rocket to launch. You can reach complicated and not so frequent wanted orbits easier and cheaper, and you are not forced to stay in the dimensions of the payload adapter provided by the company servicing the bigger rockets. You may get a place on the bigger rocket for less money, but you have to make some adaptations to your required orbit to fit the requirements of the other primary payloads, or you will never launch. SmallSat launchers are, on the other hand, offer you a complete rocket for just a bit more money, but you can do with it whatever you want. If they want to, customers can get a vehicle for themselves without having to take care of other customers' needs. And if they decide to share the rocket with one or two other customers, the cost gets even lower than on a big rocket flying rideshare missions. It may seem that SmallSat launchers have a lot of advantages over bigger launch vehicles in any dimension, but that isn't the entire truth. SmallSat launchers have their advantages, of course, but bigger rockets have some too. And the main point in favor of a vehicle like the Falcon 9 is cost. Look at the cost to payload ratio of SmallSat launchers and the Falcon 9. The price per kilogram is almost 5 times higher when choosing the by far cheapest SmallSat launcher, the Falcon 1, over the larger Falcon 9. And the entire rocket is just about 2.5 times more expensive than the Firefly Alpha, but can lift up to 15 times the payload, meaning the cost efficiency is way higher. The customers may have to wait longer and may have to make some tweaks to their trajectory to fit within the rocket and the other customers' needs, but they would pay way less to get their satellite into orbit. A rideshare plot on the Falcon 9 doesn't exceed a price of $4.15 million for 830 kg to LEO, which is not even close to the cost of a SmallSat launcher for the same satellite. And the more satellites you want to launch, the better bigger rockets get, especially if you'd have to charter 2 SmallSat launchers for your constellation. But if you have just a handful of really small satellites, the SmallSat launchers are more beneficial than the larger launch vehicle. That's the main reason why they even exist. In many situations, smaller is really better. SmallSat launchers are the best way to get into orbit for certain customers. But there is a threat to the world of tiny SmallSat launchers. Their main advantage is going to become their worst enemy soon. I'm talking about their cost. Currently, they have advantages over the other launchers available. But in the second comparison, there was another launch vehicle that we ignored a bit on purpose. Ironically, the largest flying thing humanity has ever created, the SpaceX Starship, poses the biggest threat to the tiny SmallSat launchers. Look at the cost of launching a Starship. It is even cheaper than most of the SmallSat launchers today and tomorrow. Starship has a lower price and a higher capability than every other rocket ever created. It offers customer a ride for the satellites with individual properties for just $5 million. And the rideshare prices could drop to just a few $1,000s per satellite. Those values can only be achieved through full usability and the sheer size of Starship and are impossible to reach by SmallSat launchers. Starship is really going to disrupt the launch market even in the rather unexpected ways. Once online, Starship will outperform all of the SmallSat launchers and therefore threaten the existence of the vehicles and their manufacturers. Small companies like Firefly, Astra, or Relativity Space will get into serious trouble because of the flying beast by SpaceX. It may seem that SpaceX currently has a monopoly in the spaceflight industry, but that may even become more extreme in the future, since they are the company with the by far best vehicle in the history of spaceflight. Smaller can indeed be better, at least at the current state of the launch market. SmallSat launchers can be successful by outperforming the bigger rideshare vehicles. Various companies are entering the SmallSat market with their own vehicles, and they all will make money with them. But the whole market segment is slowly getting overcrowded and will come to a sudden end in a few years. All those smaller companies have to either improve, change the market segment, which will likely not work out as well, or they'll go bankrupt and due to not being offered any missions anymore. Is smaller really better? At the moment, yes. In the future, probably not. And that was it for the third episode of Spaceflight Deep Dives. If you watched this video until the very end, thank you for that. And if you enjoyed it, why don't hit the like button, share the video with your friends, and subscribe to the Rocket Hub. I would appreciate it really a lot. We see ourselves next week, and until then, I'm out. Tschüss.